I am delighted to be here. I sincerely apologize that I simply, for medical reasons, could not be here today. I don't have deals, but I simply was there when I should, and therefore unable to do my schedule, and I apologize. I visited the Middle East for the second time in years in January with my wife as guest of the Anti-Defamation League. I left the tour to spend a full day on the West Bank with an old associate from the University of Utah. It turns out that the director of the United Nations Relief Works Agency on the West Bank is Robert Hopkins, a native of St. George, who's an old friend from the University of Utah is what we say when we're on the campus down here, right? We don't say the university here without meaning something else. And he was kind enough, though people advised against it, to spend some time with me and to take me into two of the camps. We visited Dahesha in the morning, which is just outside of Bethlehem, and later on that day, later in the morning, a camp near Jericho. Had lunch with a Palestinian professor and some others, and then visited Ramallah in the afternoon for about 4 hours, spending about an hour and a half with a land planning expert who was good enough to show me what their problems were, and trying on behalf of some of the Palestinian settlements to get additional space on the West Bank, and then spent an hour and a half, 2 hours with Al-Haq, which is, as many of you know, an agency of lawyers dedicated to documenting human rights abuses on the West Bank. I then spent a full day in Egypt and visited with a number of Egyptian officials, including the man Mustafa Khalil, who was the prime minister under President Sadat during the Camp David negotiations and the peace accords. I found it to be an immensely interesting visit, and resolved because of the frustration I felt at not being able really to come to a full understanding of the situation, first of all, and second of all, wondering how on earth a freshman congressman on foreign affairs could be of some assistance. I resolved to come back over April recess, so I am a congressional fact-finding tour of one, leaving Sunday and spending 10 days. I'm going to spend a couple of days in Egypt, a couple of days in Jordan, a day in Bahrain, and a couple of days in Jerusalem. My observations, quite frankly, are, first of all, I came home very critical of the administration for their seeming lack of interest in helping. I believe very firmly, I have my own ideas about how the situation ought to be resolved on the merits, but don't feel that that's really the American role. I think the American role in the Middle East is to try to bring the parties together. We have not only a vital interest in seeing some peaceful, fair solution to that difficulty, but we also have a valid interest in protecting, I think, valid American interests there, and in assuring that the Soviet presence does not become unduly pervasive. So I was critical of the administration. I wrote the Secretary of State. I appeared on McNeil Lehrer and criticized them, urged the administration to appoint a peace commission of some kind, urging upon them that they appoint 2 or 3 former secretaries of state to go stay in the Middle East. Said I could not imagine a Henry Kissinger or Cyrus Vance allowing to happen what was happening and not being over there in the middle of it. And I don't pretend that that was the reason that a couple of weeks later the Secretary got involved. But he did get involved, and I have been very supportive privately and publicly as well of what he has tried to do. We had a briefing day before yesterday by Undersecretary Dick Murphy, Assistant Secretary Dick Murphy for Middle Eastern Affairs, who gave us some background on what the Secretary now hopes to accomplish on this trip. And they are positive without having any new signals, so he tells me that has led the Secretary back. I do think that we should do, in essence, what Jimmy Carter did. I must say, as a compatriot and political partisan of Mr. Carter, that I've never been unduly impressed with his presidential accomplishments, but what he did at Camp David in taking Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin and learning the substance of their issues and pulling them together and holding them together, at times saying you only have one sandwich and you're not leaving, and at one point literally holding the two of them by the hands and saying we're not going until we get this finished, and going back and back and back, I think was a great accomplishment. It took great bravado on the part of Anwar Sadat. His writings indicate that he really was fatalistic, didn't feel like he could really survive it, but at least for a long time, and he was, of course, prescient. He was correct. But he did feel strongly about effecting a peace with Israel, and with the help of this administration, they effected it. And I think this administration did not try to set out the substantive decisions that they made, but rather simply used the full power of the presidential office and the American presence to try to assure that they faced the issues, and where possible used our influence and help in trying to help them get over some rough spots, and there were many of them. Well, that's basically the role I see for this country, and I'm delighted that the Secretary is there. I have an interest and represent the Foreign Affairs Committee, most of whose members feel that getting into the Middle East is a tar baby, that it is something that no politician in his right mind or good sense would want to get into. But my own feeling is, one, that the committee needs somebody who is interested in it, and two, that I am interested in it, and secondly, probably qualify under those two categories anyway. So here I am trying to, on the part of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, see whether there is something that can be done. I'd like to just do questions. You've set them up, I expect, and I'm delighted to try to respond to them. Yes?
Given what you just said about the necessity for the United States to get more involved in the peace budget program and to bring the groups together, do you have any understanding of what the administration expects we're going to gain by closing the PLO offices?
No, and it was a dumb mistake.
What was the
well,
what was the impetus?
I should say that I did not resist, and now wish I had, the closing of the PLO mission. The political office I probably would have supported, but I think it was a mistake for it to close the PLO office. What would we gain? The impetus was to try, I guess, to re-express the point. That is traditional American policy, that the PLO, a terrorist organization, not recognizing resolutions 242 and 338, ought not itself to be recognized as a political entity. That having been said, I do not think they should have excluded them from should not have closed the United Nations mission. And looking back, wish that I had done something about that. Yes?
I wonder how the Americans call the PLO a terrorist organization, while just in 3 months, the Israeli government, which you recognize as democratic government, has killed over 120 civilians, including old people and kids, about 10 and even younger or older, teenagers. And I wonder how the Americans call the PLO as a terrorist organization, while the Israeli government as a democratic government.
Well, the long-standing refusal on the part of the Palestinian nations and most Arab nations to recognize Israel's right to exist, the two United Nations resolutions, has given at least an intellectual premise for American foreign policy. I do not defend the tactics of Israel. I defend their right to maintain order.
Under while keeping oppression, regardless of the means.
Well, things go backward in the Middle East if they don't go forward. And as you know, after Sadat's death, Egypt closed down what appeared to be at the time positive steps toward a final resolution of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I think that's unfortunate that Mr. Mubarak did not at the time feel strong enough to pursue it. The political situation in Israel is very, as you know, total political gridlock, and Mr. Shamir's refusal to attend an international conference is justifiable only on understanding his fragile political situation there. I wish he would. I so said to him in a meeting with him 2 weeks ago in Washington. I think that Rabin has got to be the least sensitive public official of my knowledge, not only in his statement about we're going to beat them instead of use live ammunition and thinking that that would sell and solve the public relations problem that they'd had for the 3 to 4 previous weeks since the uprisings began in early December. I do not defend, feel no obligation to defend either the beatings or killings that are not in themselves protective of life. Yes, sir.
We seem to be a little wishy-washy in our stance towards terrorism. That type of situation, we won't allow the president of Austria to visit the United States officially because of his past. The prime minister from Israel that you mentioned a few minutes ago was himself a terrorist and part of an organization that bombed the British headquarters hotel in Israel at one time. We allow Irish Republican Army or representatives to march in St. Patrick's Day parade. Is your feeling really what we see in the news now, the suggestion and what maybe a number of people felt for years, that it's the Israeli lobby or Jewish lobby that has a tremendous impact on our government, and that in fact guides to a great degree our government's attitude towards Israel?
I think there's no question.
A large contingent of that group, but even Utah has sort of a cultural bias, perhaps, that may guide you. I'm not sure.
I would be less than candid if I didn't tell you I have a cultural bias. I come from, I guess, the background of. I expect 90% Mormons here, and I can't address your question except dealing with it in that context. That certainly is my background, and the strong relationship that I think that the Mormon people feel theologically, to the Jewish people, we consider ourselves first cousins, as you know well. So that has to be a bias. To answer directly your question, though, the Israeli lobby is a very powerful lobby. There's no question about it, that they are very, and they've been helpful to me politically, and I am close to them. I do not, because of that or for any other reason, feel any need to defend brutality and misjudgment. I've not openly attacked them, except to say on McNeil-Lehrer, as I did, that I thought that the beatings were improper, and hoped that they were about to stop, as the news was then indicating they were, but recognized Israel's right to maintain order and to protect the lives of its troops. But the Israeli lobby is very powerful. There's no question about that, and I would not deny it. America inextricably tied and large part responsible for the creation of the Israeli state 40 years ago. And all those things play into it. That does not excuse us from an even hand in foreign policy. And I guess that's the mystery that I would like to help solve. Go ahead, if you had another question.
Well, I guess I feel we have a lot of problems here. Our cultural bias is the one of the Holy Land being designated for the chosen people. I guess as a public governmental attitude, is that logical? I suppose we could apply the same thing to the Irish problem. The American Indians have a stake on this continent that is much closer in time than the Israelis do as an organized entity in Palestine. One goes back 18 or 1900 years. We're about a 200-year, 500-year situation in our relationship with the American Indian. I guess I have a real hard time with this problem. Can we say that the Palestinian boundaries of the Old Testament are legitimate boundaries today and defend that as a national...
I don't know. I just don't think it's our role to say where and how. But I do think it's our role to help assure something does happen, and I do think that use of American foreign and military aid are legitimate tools of persuasion in assuring that it does happen. Yes, sir.
But many times the Congress have decided that they should not support any government that violates human rights wherever it can. How come the Congress is still supporting Israel and they're violating it more than the South Africa, in my opinion, than the Nazis themselves did to them? They're doing worse to the Palestinians than
Well,
any person can.
I certainly will not say that the last 4 months have not given some evidence of improper brutality. I don't think you can document your statement prior to the December 9th uprising, but there is some truth and some concern and some accuracy in your statement. There is pressure being asserted, and I think it was basically action of the American Jewish community, to their credit, and of a number of others in this country, that the indiscriminate beatings were stopped. I note that the number of deaths has increased significantly in the last 10 days, and I think that's very, very worrisome. But I'm not yet willing to say, given what's happened since December 9th, that we're going to cut off Israeli aid. I am willing to say that I am spending time to try to help resolve it, and will, I think, hopefully bring to that task an open mind. Go ahead.
But the violation has not been only since December. I'm a Palestinian and I was raised there. My age, I'm 28. Since I can recall, the violation has been there. But only since December, the American public started talking about it. I'm sure the Congress and the U.S. government knew about that before. And how come, you didn't do things in the past, and now you're not
Well,
doing anything?
I'm not prepared to accept what you say, but I am spending some time trying to figure that. I saw a hand over here, yes, sir.
I have kind of 2 points I want to push you for more details on. One is in the whole notion of who we want to talk to. I think we obviously need to talk to some Palestinians. We need to get someone who's representative. How can we do that unless we're willing to accept them for what they are? It seems like our policy is guaranteed to fail when every possible Palestinian representative is by definition not talk toable by official signed policy of the United States. How can we deal with that?
Well, I remind you that it's not America's job to talk to those people. It's America's job to try to get them to talk to each other. The solution that has of this incredibly complex situation that has been brought forward and seems to be workable is, in my view, the international conference, the Schultz so-called concept, whereby the Palestinians are represented as a part and participating as a part of the Jordanian delegation to an international conference. The international conference being nothing more than an attempt to try to give, let us recognize it in this room, an attempt to give King Hussein some kind of political cover, and hopefully to help him, allow him to survive. I think his situation is more endangered than Sadat's was because of extremists who simply will not tolerate the idea of talking to any Israelis. I think that the solution of the Palestinians, which seems to have been bought off on by Chairman Arafat, if not the West Bank, all of them, at least some of the political structure of the PLO off the West Bank. The Palestinians would be part of the Jordanian delegation. The Israelis have agreed not in essence to check their credentials, in essence saying that we do not object to PLO members being a part of the Jordanian delegation. Mr. Shamir refuses to go to an international conference, unreasonably, in my view, and I said as much to him in a session, saying why, well, you don't need to go in that, but anyway, I think when you recognize the international conference does not have plenipotentiary powers, it has no power either to set the agenda or to veto any decision made. It is a cover, flat and clear, to bring the Jordanians together with Palestinians into a bilateral talk with the Israelis, and hopefully Syria to talk about the Golan Heights as well in direct talks with Israel. That it seems like to me foolish that he is refusing to go into that conference when he says he just wants to talk bilaterally. He's concerned that a conference which will have the 5 members of the United Nations Permanent Security Council, permanent members of the Security Council, as observers, he says they will pressure him into giving up land for peace. Well, everybody knows land has to be given up for peace, but he wants the cover of being able to say he's not going to an international conference, wants direct negotiations. And I said to him, why can you not recognize that the international conference does not have the power to pressure you? Has no power to veto or set any, and frankly got no satisfactory answer. I hope that the elections, if nothing happens before, does in essence give us a government with majority power. That may be too wishful thinking, however, and then hopefully you can get somebody to a conference which Spain can afford politically and physically to attend. Go ahead.
Let me just follow up on one other question. You talked about the Camp David process of kind of cajoling and holding their hands and not feeding them and things like that. But I think the Camp David process also didn't probably threaten to cut off aid to Menachem Begin. I wonder if right now we can't even get to the Camp David situation where a president could use cajoling powers. It seems like without some kind of pressure. Would you support right now the use of some kind of pressure to get their parties to the negotiating table?
Well, this president, of course, has neither the ability nor the interest to do what Jimmy Carter did. Jimmy Carter saw nothing but detail. This president can't remember any of them. So it's foolish to believe that you can have that kind of physical aura of the presidency participating. There were some threats, if you read carefully what happened at Camp David, some implicit promises to decrease assistance to Israel, and very explicit promises to bring Egypt up to the same category of aid, and that was very, very helpful.
But do you think that now, right now, or maybe you say once the American elections are over, that it might be time to put that kind of pressure again, or would you be opposed to that?
No, I think that it's proper for an American presence to say, let us reason together, and we are here because we have such a presence here, and American tools will be applied both in a positive and a straightforward way. Yes, I have no objection to that at all. I think that that's proper. I have no problem with that at all. Yes, back here.
It seems that one of the greatest roadblocks and one of the greatest causes of problems now is illegal Israeli settlements on the occupied territory. Why hasn't the U.S. government ever had the wherewithal to directly link the quid pro quo way our aid to the continued illegal settlements and using our leverage to force the Israelis to at least not make peace, push peace further into the future by furthering the settlement process?
Well, administrations both the Carter and the Reagan administrations, to their credit, have gone on record very strongly opposing settlements in the West Bank.
About the money and the military power behind the leverage that we really do have, not just the rhetoric.
Well, we've not chosen to do that.
Do you think
Now you're saying why, and you have to go back to the earlier issues we've talked about, I suppose. Go ahead. Pardon me, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, what step would you personally suggest to the president beyond Schultz's mission now to actually further the process?
Oh, I'm not for going beyond at this point what Mr. Schultz is trying to accomplish, trying to get them together. I hope this time that in shuttling back and forth he can not only reiterate American determination, but start to maybe have a moderating effect on what's happening. The real problem from the administration's point of view is trying to hold King Hussein and the Jordanians, and the Palestinians together as a delegation, when you find the Palestinians saying we're not going to be part of the Jordanian delegation, but the signals. You know, we fight these, everybody fights these, fight is not the right word, everybody struggles with these problems at two levels, the public level and the private level, and almost everybody says two things, one publicly and one privately, and they are almost always mutually exclusive, what they say. And so the signals are the Palestinians are willing to do that. It's clear that the Americans are putting every ounce of pressure short, perhaps, of saying we'll cut off money, to saying to the Israelis, we're not going to pressure you, that the conference will not have the kinds of powers that you're talking about. There is no excuse not to start your bilateral negotiations under the aegis of an international conference. We cannot, we'll be devastated if King Hussein, quite frankly, he is the key player in this whole thing. Hussein's very nervous about more Palestinians being politically into his kingdom, and yet willing, it seems like to me, to take some kind of at least an initial interim sovereignty relationship with the West Bank. I said to the president, the premier of Egypt, why don't you take Gaza? That is, it seems so silly. Why don't you take Gaza? Why should Gaza be linked to Jordan? And he says, quite honestly, Mr. Owens, we don't want Gaza. So it is so they say one thing and do another in all of those negotiations, and I have spent so much time figuring out what they're saying publicly, and I'm now trying to figure out what they mean privately. But I may be talking around your question. I'm not trying to avoid it.
I just want to ask you seem to put a lot of stress on the importance of King saying, but that dismisses Trump as a sellout who seems to be powerful. What King was saying is, it seems that the Americans, by emphasizing King Hussein, are really trying to proceed on down the Camp David process, and they've eliminated Egypt, and then they'll cut off Jordan, but they still won't have Egypt, but they're still leaving the Syrians there. So I don't know, to say King Hussein is so important, I think, is to miss the point.
Well,
That comprehensive piece is important.
you know, I'd be willing to listen to your points. It's only been the last 3 weeks that you've seen any public discussion of the Golan Heights. And you're right, we have enormously, I think publicly, and I do privately, have enormously greater confidence in Hussein than I do in Assad. I told you that I'm interested in and concerned about the Soviet Union's influence increasing in the Middle East, and that relationship between Assad and the Soviet Union and Syria's relationship with Iran are troublesome, I think. But everything else in the Middle East is troublesome as well. So maybe, you know, I'd be interested in hearing a little more of your thought. I'm trying to read up on that very issue. I'm not going to Syria this trip. See, I was trying to give somebody else who hasn't had a chance. Yes.
The point we're discussing right now is what the Palestinians don't want.
Pardon me?
The point that we are discussing right now about King Hussein taking control of the West Bank and President Mubarak taking control of Gaza and President Assad taking control of the Golan Heights.
Well, I don't mean control as such, but I mean,
you know,
yes, right.
Okay. That's exactly what the Palestinians don't want. They are just asking for a state on their own. They want to control.
I understand. And
that's the point that the world does not seem to understand.
But I can tell you that there is no other Arab state, as near as I can tell, that wants to see, at this point, an independent Palestinian state.
Well,
now, the question, so that we're trying to deal, the issue, as I understand it, we're trying to deal with that issue because no other position except support ultimately is defensible. Jordan doesn't want an independent Palestinian state. Assad doesn't want an independent Palestinian state. Mubarak doesn't want an independent Palestinian state. So you talk about two issues, it seemed like to me. You talk about an interim solution, and that's really what I was trying to address. But it seemed like to me the genius, if there is one, of the Schultz approach is his determination that come hell or high water on November 1st or December 1st, you start the long-term discussions. In essence saying, to try to respond to the PLO's legitimate concerns that we're going to get into some interim relationship and then forget us for another 20 years until we start throwing rocks again. Schultz is trying to say we are going to deal at basically in the same time frame with both an interim and a final resolution. But the Arabs don't want an independent Palestinian state at this point. That is the real, it seems like to me, the realistic political problem that you have to deal with. Everybody is very worried about that point, but no other point as a final solution is defensible. I agree with that.
But
Go
what
ahead.
about the Palestinians? I mean, they're getting killed, and they've been in a diaspora for 30 years. What about them? Why don't we care about them, about their rights, about their human rights? They're still human beings.
Well, but you cannot argue with what you're saying. What I'm trying to say is we have to deal with the geopolitics
That's right. But we can't
of the
have somebody
situation to
resent them.
affect a resolution, hopefully, that ultimately achieves the goals that you're
Right. But
suggesting.
since there's a Palestinian nation still exists, we can't ask King Hussein to represent them. We can't ask President Assad to represent them. The Palestinians have their government, their leader, and they want him to represent them and to speak for them. That's why they object the Schultz conference or whatever, peace conference. That's the point that Palestinians try to make.
The problem with this is that when you talk with any party to it, their position is absolutely understandable and absolutely defensible. The problem with it is that when you get all the parties, they all, with their independently defensible situation, all those positions are totally incompatible. And so what the United States has to do, which is why I keep coming back to process, the United States has to worry about process. We have to lend every ounce of power and ability that we have to try to assure that somehow everybody involved gets a place at the table and the opportunity to make some rational conclusion. And the worry is that events are overtaking us. Nobody seems to think of the Palestinians until they think of themselves and manifest themselves. I must say that the 110 deaths, or 112, whatever the count is today, is it 24? Those deaths and the thousands of injuries, and I've seen injured and know that they're there, have had an immense effect on the world. If it was totally indigenous, and I believe it was, somebody looking at the manner of the uprising, the children throwing stones, the teenagers throwing stones backed up by mothers and little sisters, could not have been better planned to make their case to the world than they have. And that has led 4 months later, whatever we are, 4 months, I guess a little about 4 months after, that has led to a situation no one could have foreseen 4 months ago. So I think the world has to recognize, those of us who are not a part of it, except as humanity being torn apart forces us all to become involved. I think those of us on the outside have to realize that that something has to be done about the process of getting those people together. Everything has to be done about the process of getting those people together. As you know, the Arabs, the hate between the Arabs, different Arabs, is as great as the hate between the Arabs and the Israelis in many cases. It just is a very tough situation. I don't mean to talk loosely about things that are meaningful personally to you. I just want to see the process implemented to bring those things, and I worry, quite frankly, the death of the first, quote, collaborator, 2.5 weeks ago in Ramallah, when they hung from the flagpole, raising the specter of all kinds of people who've been cooperating with the Israelis in the West Bank being punished in that way, and that kind of bloodshed that you see all the time in South Africa is a very frightening specter, and I worry that that may well come about.
That collaborator was dealt with in that way because he was really hurting the Palestinian people.
Well, and he shot a child, a 4-year-old child, and in his own defense, supposedly. He panicked, but I'm just saying that it looks like to me that situation, it has been, the 124 deaths have been far less than you would have thought could happen, and that many could happen in a day if they really get, and that's the worry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I see this is frustrating to you. I'll quit speaking and you can take it. But it is a serious problem between the Palestinian and the other Arabs.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's fine. That's why the Palestinians don't look at King Hussein as their leader, and
I know they don't. I know they don't. But there is a tacit agreement, as I understand it, that initially they will allow PLO members to attend an international conference and these bilateral negotiations under the aegis of the Jordan government with the king, and the theory is somehow some kind of an interim relationship, sovereignty relationship with Jordan, and some of the signals are positive, even though the public ones are not. The gentleman in back. Yes, sir.
As you have told us today, and you have recognized that the Israeli government is an invader in the Palestinian land, and you have said that the Palestinian people is fighting against armies backed by the United States.
No, that's not quite accurate, but go ahead.
Well, you said that the mothers and the kids are fighting and throwing rocks against the armies, and that the situation that actually is going on over there. How would you how would you do something? How would we do something in order for us to try to change the situation in that part of the world? Because we are, as we say, forming part of a nation which is the leader of the liberty and freedom in the world, yet we are backing up totally different ideals that we say we are. And you said that politicians say something and they do some other things, and they sometimes contradict each other. What I would like to know really is what's your thought and your position personally in this matter, and what you think you could do in order to change that?
Well, I confess to you that I am very intrigued by it and anxious. You know, we in Congress look for opportunities to do things that are different from others, to become an expert in some area or something, and this is an area that I've chosen to kind of get involved in because of the desire to do it, to do something. I think it is a frightening specter of what could happen relatively soon over there. So what can we do what can people attending Brigham Young University do to help is, I guess, by understanding the issue and challenging the politicians and so forth here who can have a role. And so I welcome this kind of an exchange. What can I do? That's the point of my going over and sticking my nose in it. I have an obligation to try to help as a member of Congress and a member of that committee and of that subcommittee on the Middle East to try to help guide American policy, and that's something I don't shirk from. I'm not worried about it, but it is so complex I'm not sure I fully understand it. So I'm having what is a heady experience for a boy from Panguitch. I'm going to sit down with a king and prime ministers and foreign ministers, and as I have done a little bit in the past, I'm going to be able to ask them questions and try to figure some ideas out that I can help guide American policy in a peripheral way. I have no grand illusions about this, but there is an opportunity for me in Congress to play a role, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. So I can't give you a very good answer. I have to revert to process. I mean, I think Shamir is unreasonable. I think Perez has a formula. I think the interim step of negotiations with the PLO members as a part of the Jordanian delegation makes, from my point of view, great sense. And I say give him a cover. Try to keep Hussein alive. I believe him to be the key there. Try to give him something that allows him to kind of continue to exist politically and physically. And therefore I'm saying those things kind of in private. But it really isn't my right to say that to the Prime Minister, even though I asked tough questions about it. But it is my right to see what Americans' role and how the use of America's resources play in this. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I was trying not to get back to anybody I'd called on before, but I did recognize you. Go ahead.
I think by keep saying that Hussein is the key in the Middle East is you keep avoiding the point that everybody knows that the Palestinians want the PLO to represent them, and everybody knows that they've tried hard several times in the past to go around and avoiding the PLO, and nothing has ever worked. And so it's very clear now to any politician that that trying to work a formula without the PLO is going to fail.
And I agree with that. When I say the key, I mean the interim key. I know. I told you that any other position other than an independent Palestinian state at some point is indefensible. But the interim position, I think, has to involve Jordan. Now, are you taking issue with that point?
Well, I think it's clear for represent the Palestinians, because already everybody knows the Palestinians, 95% of the Palestinians support the PLO, and they are the ones who...
And I recognize that. I had a lot of conversations, and that's what all the Palestinians tell me, including the Palestinians who are a part of the Jordanian kingdom, which is 60%. The Hashemites are actually a minority in the royal kingdom,
One thing that you mentioned...
which is why Hussein is in such a precarious situation. Pardon me.
One thing that you mentioned about the other Arab countries that don't support the Palestinian state, they just are worried of it's going to be a model of democracy, you know, and this is what they're worried about. They've been, most leaders of the Arab states have been in power for a long time, and they just don't want any kind of a model like what the Palestinian state is going to be. They're worried about their positions. This is all what they're worried about.
Could I ask where you're from? Could I ask where you're from?
I'm Palestinian.
No, I understand that, but could you tell me where?
Privately, I might tell you.
Okay, all right. No, I understand. I don't mean to embarrass your...
Another thing, they're worried that a lot of the aid that they get from outside sources is going to stop if they solve the Palestinian state. Jordan and Syria and Egypt get a lot of support from Arab countries because they say that they're on the borders, they're on the front. And by having it, solving the problem, this is going to stop, and they're going to be in that shape, monetarily.
We're going to have a chance to visit later. Are you in that group that I'm meeting with?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Yes, sir.
I was just curious, as a student of university and studying international relations, I've read a lot about Congressmen becoming part of the fact-finding missions and things.
Some people call them junkets. Yeah.
How is the committee formed, and what do you specifically do when you're there?
In the committee? Or when I'm in Jordan?
When you're in Jordan,
for example? Well, there are junkets where you go and inspect the sand and the beaches of American Guam or Puerto Rico and so forth. Those are junkets. And I have avoided that's for because I've only been in office about 15 months taking any of those kinds. But what I am doing is in 10 days visiting 5 countries, visiting with the heads of state, foreign ministers, opposition leaders. I have an exhaustive schedule, and I'm worried, quite frankly, if I can stay awake because of the jet lag that I have experienced when I do it before. So I'm just going for meetings with people, talking with people, trying to listen, come back and do a report to the committee, and probably make a bothersome mess of myself saying, here's what we ought to be doing. That's the way our system seems to function. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating for you to sit here, as this gentleman just did, and say, what can we do? It's frustrating to be in Congress and know that you can do something about a lot of things and not having the time. So you decide issues that you want to get into. And I've got 3 or 4 that I'm really getting into on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the major one is the Middle East.
Congressman, should we just handle a couple more questions from non-Palestinians?
I'm not sure we can handle it.
And then we'll break up, and then you'll have an opportunity to meet with the Palestinians. Okay, fine.
We do whatever Ray Hillen says. The gentleman in the white, and then this lady right here.
Well, I have a first question, just putting what I'm saying, and then also I have a question. It seems to me like both sides have very strong arguments.
There's 7 sides, and they all 7 have strong arguments. But I'm sorry. I mean, there isn't. That is, if it were 2 sides, I could figure it out a little bit better. But go ahead. No, I don't mean to. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm just saying it is.
No, I really.
You're right.
I do not know all that much about the situation. This is something that I'm learning about.
No, I don't either.
In the dark. But it seems to me like both sides. The Palestinians and the Jews both would feel like it was a great injustice inflicted upon them if some kind of a peaceful resolution would come about. Both of them want more than they're willing to give. And that's what most obviously what makes it so difficult to find a resolution. But I've heard about the French-Egyptian resolution, I think it's called, 2+2 resolution. the one thing question that's coming to my mind while listening to this as well, the Palestinians can't expect the Israelis to leave any more than the American Indians can expect us to leave the country. But why is it that, what are the other Arab states, why is it that they object to a Palestinian state? What is it, where's the problem there?
Why do the other Arabs not want a Palestinian state?
Yeah.
I guess the Palestinians could give us a better answer to that.
He already did.
Which is what?
He already did.
I'm not sure that it is this model of democracy argument, but that may well be. This gentleman knows more about it than I do. I think they fear that a independent Palestinian state would be the exact opposite. I think there's concern on a lot of the Arab states over there that the Palestinians would become a very powerful force and would not be democratic with a small d. I think that may be another reason. But this gentleman talked about the jealousies from the other direction. All I can tell you for sure is that those are all the private signals.
Okay, one more question.
I have this lady right here.
I have a little example. Being a religious institution, I thinking about all the prophecies and things that have been made in this area. I find it very interesting about the proposals over here. They want their own state. I wasn't even aware of that. It is very interesting, and I hope it can come to pass. And I also keep remembering what happened to the Israelis. They were bounced off the countries, and they couldn't go anywhere when they were fleeing. They were poverty-stricken, and it's just a terrible. And they had their terrorists and so on. So it seems to me like the Israelis and the Palestinians have very similar elements. And I also wanted to mention that you were speaking of the Jewish heritage and the Mormons. While we have that, we also have linkages to the Arab countries. I mean, the people of the Arabs are linked to both of them.
That's correct.
And
That's
so
correct.
all
Theological links. That's correct.
The human question can come to pass. I had a daughter that worked in Egypt for a year, and very, very nice genealogies there. But still, it seems like there's a lot of time and cultural things that also have to come to pass in order to get together. The kind of things that you're encountering there. I mean, it's very difficult. But I'm hoping, I don't know how many people vote here in this class, but you as a representative, maybe you can speak up for this idea. Maybe the Palestinian person can be allowed to be heard, because there are terrorists in Israel also. Maybe you can speak for that. Maybe it can come to pass. Maybe all the prophecies will unfold as people can be human. I mean, they can care for one another. All humans.
Well, it is the most incredibly complex situation I have ever tried to get on top of, and I am nowhere near the top in terms of understanding. And this is in truth, to answer this gentleman's question, a fact-finding mission. I am going to talk with the people who have to make the decisions, and occasional suggestion, but basically going to be asking questions and then coming back and trying to influence a little bit congressional policy toward them. But I'm beginning to understand not just the surface issues, but I think some of the underlying issues, and why most times there is both a public and a private position on the part of those people over there, and it is a situation without any obvious or apparent solution, because the West Bank is Judea and Samaria, and the meaning in Israeli history, the meaning in Christian history, is very real, and yet it's traditionally Palestine, and it's theirs. They consider it theirs. The easy way to say is, if we can get Yasser Arafat and the PLO straightforwardly to recognize the right of Israel to exist, and resolutions 242 and 338, which Arafat has toyed with that idea. But you see, most of the Palestinians subject to being corrected here, don't think Israel has a right even to the rest of Israel. Well, I think that. But anyway, well, anything's fair except that we're an hour and a half behind our schedule here, and I am going to have to spend some little bit of time with them. But I think if you ask them, that most of them would say that. But I could be wrong. Some of them would not.
I think what we'd like to do, Congressman, is take about a 5-minute break, and if there are others who want to stay, I guess you just want. All right, I didn't instruct you otherwise. We'll take a 5-minute.
And I have to leave her in about 25 minutes because I've got my missionary conference at my house, and no one else there, and that begins at 7 o'clock in northern Salt Lake. So I really can't stay all that much longer, but I am anxious to talk, and have been seeking for a couple of months to talk with these Palestinian students.
And we'll have you back after this next trip, okay?
Oh, I'd love to. And this time I'll be on time.
And we want to thank you for including BYU on your fact-finding trip, because you may have gotten a few facts here. So what we'll do is excuse those of you that are you non-Palestinians. Is that me? That's me too. Thank you very much.